Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy 2024, and welcome to our 2024 election countdown. I know everybody is so excited to hear more about the word election, right? Scott,
Right. Yeah. It's that time again.
it's here. It feels like, every 2 years or so, we do some webinars. We talk to our folks out there who are in the cloud communication space about the opportunity of the elections. And off-year elections are nice, but presidential elections are even better. So,
Mhm.
with that, I'll start with the kind of the same recent look back that I did for our last one, and that's that I've received, I think, four sets of text messages so far that were politically leaning. I
Mhm.
think all three of the top GOP folks have hit me up, and I've gotten one from the Biden camp. So I feel like we're off to a fast start.
Okay. Yeah.
And we're what, 4 or 5 days away from the first caucuses. So
Mhm.
what we've got ahead of us, and I know you're going to run us through all of this, is that the election's not till obviously Q4. We've got a ways to go. But in the meantime, these devices are going to be full of well, I don't this always does it. There you go. These devices are going to be full of messages. So I'd love to get your background on, what how many messages were sent the last go around? What are we looking for this round? And how can everybody who's attending potentially participate in this
Mhm.
process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're just, if you're seeing already four messages, it's going to get worse, to be honest
Yeah,
with you. Yeah. There is
right.
so much money that's going to be thrown into this election. I've read quite a few, experts' opinions on it, and they're saying that it's going to be probably the most money in this type of a general election cycle in decades.
Yes.
Some of the numbers that I read were like as much as $10 billion are going to be spent on, basically getting the word out to constituents nationwide for both
Right.
sides.
Wow. 10 billion. That's incredible.
Yep, yep.
Well, with that, Scott, I'll let you go ahead. Let's dive right in.
Yeah, I mean, and so it's one of those things, like, Tim just said, right? We're just getting started, and messaging, I think, we've already started to see that. I've seen some, TV ads, I've seen some email ads, and so forth. So, that's typically, when we get into this type of election cycle, general elections especially, you're not going to basically get any kind of break, from the political, marketing for, probably another 12 months. In
Yep.
fact, we see it typically go even through December and early January if there's any runoffs. So, but one of the things I think it's important to understand is that there's a huge potential here. There's a lot of opportunity, for anybody who's in the communication space, especially if you have text messaging as one of the channels that you generate revenue from. So, there's a lot of things that we're going to cover here, what you can and cannot do. I know there's a lot of questions regarding some of the new rulings or, opinions that have been released by the FCC. How are the carriers going to respond to this type of, political traffic, et cetera. So, this particular, this first side right here, I think it's clear. Messaging is by far and still is number one when it comes to the best way to get a message out to voters. And so, that's going to be the primarily driver. It's still SMS, MMS. In fact, we've seen MMS has been kind of the lead on, political text messaging for the last several years. And, I've heard recently that even, some of the big political messaging platforms might even start moving, some of that back into just standard SMS. So, so there's definitely a lot of options around that. The RCS, Rich Communication Services, I think it was, when was it, December or November of last year, where Apple said that they were going to support RCS. And RCS is really just a very enriched type of messaging solution. If you're using Android, you've probably been seeing it for quite some time. And then, of course, on iOS, you have iChat, and you have a lot more flexibility with images and video and things like that. So, however, Apple did say that it was going to be sometime in 2024.
Right.
So the question is really RCS going to be something you can use, before the election, or is it going to be something that'll actually land in December, a year later, right? So, stay tuned for that. We're going to have a lot of information on, what our plans are and what the carriers are going to do with RCS. So, definitely it's good news, right? And I think that's something a lot of us in this industry have been waiting some time for. So, another thing too, that this is a ringless voicemail, and that's a LCR, or an outbound voice type of product. We're seeing a lot of interest in people using that, I'm sure you're going to get, you're on your phone and all of a sudden you get an alert that, hey, you got a voicemail. Like, voicemail? I didn't get an inbound
Yep.
call. And you're going to look at the voicemail, you're going to listen to it. I have iPhone and iOS, and it actually transcribes it so I can actually read the message, which is nice. But you're going to see that you're probably going to get political messages through your ringless voicemail channel. So we'll cover a little bit of that, what you can and cannot do. And so, there's a lot of different options. And I think, the one thing that I would hope that everybody walks away from, is that if you're not doing political messaging now, you should be. You should be looking at this as an alternative channel. Obviously, there's been a lot of constriction and a lot of focus on, restricting lead gen and affiliate marketing. So for those type of companies that are looking to, kind of pivot a little bit and recover some of that revenue that's been lost over the last 6 months due to the changes in the industry, political is going to be a really solid option for you. So, that's a perfect segue into kind of this next slide is, so, why voice? Messaging is still by far the best way to engage a voter or a consumer. And so that doesn't mean it's the only way, right? So as we previously mentioned, this is going to be an all-out frontal attack on your senses for the next probably 12 months. And so, you're going to definitely look at getting, a lot of calls, and there's still some, advantages to calling. Voice is more personal. I think right now, I think most of us, right, we're seeing a large influx of our inbound calls being filtered out as unknown caller, potential spam, right? Because if they're not in our contact list, the carriers are just saying, well, we don't know who this is. And we're telling you that we don't know who this is. So most of us don't typically answer those. And so I think that's one of those areas where ringless voicemail is good, because you're probably not going to be able to talk to that subscriber because they're not going to pick up, but you can still leave them a voicemail.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's something that we do offer at Commio. We do have a really nice solution for RVM. And if you're looking for some options or more information on that, we can definitely get that to you. There absolutely is more stricter rules for robocalling in place. And, that's something you have to consider when you're looking at outbound calling for political purposes. And we'll go through that a little bit later as well. But I think the primarily focus for what we're going to talk about today is really political text messaging.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, Tim, you did the research on this one, right?
Yeah. 50 per
Yeah.
phone. 50.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we say, 50 billion political messages in 2022, and we know that is going to escalate considerably for 2024, it's easily going to exceed 50 messages per phone, right? So,
Yeah.
and as previously mentioned, right, text messaging is still by far the best option for engaging with constituents and voters. So, 39-1 is a huge ratio, right?
Yep.
So I think if
Yep.
you're on this call, you're in the right place, right? I think you're hopefully realizing that this is a great opportunity for you.
Well,
And so,
Scott,
yeah,
Scott, I was going to say, I actually, I kind of feel like that number should be 39 texts versus one call versus zero emails. Because I don't know about you, I said this last time, I haven't gotten any political emails. So
yeah,
hopefully, unless you
yeah.
subscribe, like if you go out of your way to say, hey, Mr. XYZ candidate, sign me up
Mhm.
for your emails, I'm not getting them. So maybe we'll count it in the win column.
Yeah, I think that's typical for most people. I think I've received one,
Okay.
right? And
Right.
and we're in this business, right? So I know that
Yeah.
I for a fact I'm on some of my customers' lists, and so the fact that we're just getting started.
Yep.
There's a lot to do, but so I think obviously text messaging is the default way to engage, right, and get the highest conversion and really get your call to action in the hands of your voters. So that is that's the first and foremost thing that we're gonna I hope you walk away with. And then the thing that you also have to be aware of course, are the rules, but then there's also some best practices that we're going to cover. And one of the things too that you have to remember is that what's your reaction when you get a political text message? It's like it's that people are not really happy when they get with them. They're not looking for it. And so you have to be real careful with your content, right? You have to make sure
Right.
that it's relevant. You have to make sure that all the mandatory, the best practice, the requirements, right? The legal requirements are there, but also the best practices. And then make sure that it's just in a format that really is going to engage with that subscriber. And it really is not something that they're going to immediately flag as spam or they're going to opt out of, right? That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah. And I would say this to anybody out there who wants to work with a campaign and are going to send messages. If I reply stop and I don't immediately, within a few minutes, sometimes it takes a few minutes, get confirmation that I've been unsubscribed, you've lost my vote. So let's just be clear. You got to make sure that that stuff is actually working on the back end.
That's a critical component, right? I mean, we know the TCA requirement that is, hey, you have to support an opt-out mechanism. Typically,
Yeah.
the industry standard is stop. But as Tim pointed out, that's fantastic. It's you are allowed to send a confirmation email, and you should send a
Yeah.
confirmation email or a text message, sorry,
Right.
to that subscriber, letting them know that yes, okay, we've received that, and you have been unsubscribed from this list.
Right. You got it.
All right.
Actually,
Uh,
hey, Scott, before we dive into texting, great, we already got a question. Aru's asking, what are some of the legalities around ringless voicemail? Also, consent with respect to political campaign for text calls or RVM.
those are good questions. I,
Yeah.
I I would say maybe we can
Okay.
hold off on that until we get through this because I'm thinking that most of what we're going to cover will actually answer those questions.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, great questions though.
Yeah.
So, this applies not only to political text messaging, but this also applies to pretty much any type of messaging, whether it's enterprise, B2B, if you're still doing lead gen or affiliate marketing, right? There's three options for text messaging. And the first one is short code, right? Everybody, I think, is familiar with short code. That's when you receive a text from a 5 to 6 digit number. And so short codes are, they're fantastic, primarily driven for high volume broadcast type of messaging. I think most people use short codes for 2FA and OTP, right? Two-factor authentication and one-time password type of traffic. The short code process is expensive and it's lengthy. And so, we do support short codes, and at any given time we have dozens of applications that are in flight to get approved with the carriers, but it is a long process. And so, you can expect at least 3 months for a short code to be approved and go live, because it does require individual carrier approval. So each one of those short code applications have to be signed off by the big mobile carriers, or the ones that you specified that you want to have it supported on: Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, US Cellular, etc. However, once that short code is live, right, and there's a very deep vetting process to get it, is that basically it is, you have incredible throughputs. There really aren't any restrictions. I think we've got a slide, maybe it's the next slide, that talks about, what is the throughput options that you have with each one of these. Short code is by far the best. There are some limitations. We'll cover that as well. But moving on to toll free, we're seeing a lot of people pivoting from 10DLC to toll free recently. I think a lot of it has to do with just the continued changes in the industry on 10DLC for registration
Right.
and the carrier surcharges, and it's almost something's changing daily with it. So a lot of people have pivoted to toll free, and it's fantastic. But there's also some limitations that you might run into and some things to consider if you want to look at that option. It definitely is much quicker to get a toll-free number verified than it is a short code. Commio, we can typically, on average, I know there's been a lot of, depending on who you submitted to, what carriers you're using, and so forth. Some people I've heard saying it takes at least 4 weeks to get a toll-free approved. Typically for us, that's anywhere from about 5 to 7 days. If you're an existing customer and you have a dedicated account manager, and if you have a business critical toll-free number you need verified, we could probably expedite that to maybe just 2 to 3 days. So it's definitely an option, no guarantee, but something to consider. And the costs are much less, especially the acquisition costs are much less than a short code. Excuse me. And then the third option, of course, with RCS coming, right, that might be our fourth category that we have on the slide. But for
Yeah.
now, it's the traditional long code, or 10-digit long code, or 10DLC. And that's just basically sending your messages from a local telephone number. In the industry, of course, we call those DIDs, right?
Right.
So there is a much more stringent registration process with that. You have to go through the campaign registry. You have to have basically a registered brand, and then that you have to basically register a campaign, and then that's going to fall into a particular use case. Political is one of those use cases that you can select. And then once that's approved, you have to sign the numbers to it. And then, hopefully within a short period of time, you're allowed to go ahead and it's verified, and you can start sending traffic using those local numbers. So There are some additional steps for the political use case. We're going to cover that in one of these other slides. It's not too bad. There's only a couple extra requirements that you have to do, but it's something that is a little bit, 2 steps added to another 5 steps, right? Something you have to consider. So,
Right.
but yeah, so short code, toll free, long code currently are your options for messaging.
And Scott, we had a tip here that if you do choose toll free, that you need to get a token from Campaign Verify, right, to use on your
I,
whitelisting app.
I highly recommend it
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're the toll free is right now, and again, this may change in the future. There is no campaign registry for toll free and or short code, right? So there is still a deep vetting process, and so if you're submitting toll free numbers that you want to use for political purposes, in addition to all the required components, the data that you have to provide to the DCAs and to the carriers, um, having a verified, a campaign verified token really just says, hey, this is who I say I am, or this is who that political candidate or PAC says they are. Here's their campaign verified token. You put that in the special comments or additional information, and it really helps getting those campaigns approved. So it's a
Gotcha.
good tip. All right. So we've been talking about Campaign Verify for the last couple of minutes. So there it is right there, campaignverify.org. So if you decide that you want to go with the 10 DLC route, you want to register a political campaign, before you can do that, you have to go to campaignverify.org, and you basically have to get this campaign token. And so the couple requirements that they have for that are you want to have to be eligible, right? You have to be a 527 tax exempt organization. If you're trying to register political campaigns under a 501c3, that doesn't qualify for political, and so that might be something you want to make sure that you have in order, that whoever your customer is, or if it's you who's registering directly, that you have that 527 tax exempt ID.
Hmm.
And then the next thing that you need to do is you have to be registered with the Federal Elections Commission, and there's a link there on this slide. So you go there, you register. And so when you ask for that token, they're going to verify your 527, and they're going to do a dip to the FEC database to see if you're actually a registered FEC candidate. If you check those 2 boxes, then basically you get that token. The token could be instant, or it can take a couple days to get. And then once you finally get your CV token, then you're ready to move on to the campaign registry and then start the rest of the verification process. So that is unique to 10 DLC, as Tim brought up. Right, it'd be fantastic if you're going on toll free to make sure you have
Hmm.
that verified token. That always helps. But 10 DLC, this is those extra steps that you have to do.
Gotcha.
And there it is. There's the throughputs. I know there's a lot of people on the call who love speeds and feeds, and we do as well. But when I say that, starting with short code, 100 messages per second, right? That's kind of where we kind of, hey, that's the threshold that we usually start with. Not to say that is what you could be limited to. So if you are looking to get a short code and you need much higher throughputs than 100 messages per second, that's something that you can work with, the Commio account managers or our NOC. And under certain situations, we can absolutely get you much more than 100 messages per second. So again, though, when do you use, are you going to get the deliverability and conversion with a short code? Probably not. Especially when you're doing political messaging, you want something that's a little bit more personal. Toll free is even kind of riding that line, right? Short codes and toll free numbers are typically used for commercial text messaging and any type of entity or brand that needs to send messages nationwide. So toll free is probably a really good option for national presidential candidates. And so, but is that a good fit for your local or state candidate, right? That's not, it's definitely doable, and it's a path of least resistance. But long codes may be better for those local type of races and candidates. Toll
Yeah.
free, kind of similar to a short code. It's 100 messages per second by default. We can increase that, but we don't have as much flexibility with increasing that throughput. There is a cap to that. It's not like it's open-ended. There's no really volume limit with toll free and or short code. But again, it comes down to throughput. So short code has the highest amount of throughput. Toll free has really good throughput, but it does have a cap on that. And then the other thing that you want to consider when you're looking at toll free is that it really is 5 toll free numbers per campaign. You can request to get additional toll-free numbers added to a verified campaign, but you really have to provide a pretty good reason to the DCA and the carriers of why you need more than five. And typically, if it's 6, 7, you're probably going to get away with that. You'll probably get that approved. If you're looking to add 30, 40, 50, 100 toll-free numbers to a campaign, 9 out of 10 times that's going to get rejected. So I think that's kind of important to recognize there. And then, of course, the long code numbers, the 10 DLC, right? One message per second, and you've got maybe up to 3,000 messages per day. You can do additional vetting through the campaign registry, and if you get your brand score increased, you could actually get that number raised. I'm not sure if I don't have it memorized. I think it could be an additional 10,000 messages per day with the extra vetting. So, but the reason we're here, right? It's the political messaging. So even under 10 DLC, with all of the restrictions and the limitations, political messaging still has the highest throughputs for any use case of all of them. And I think right now, T-Mobile still flags it as or listed as uncapped, and AT&T it's the highest potential threshold. It could be, I think, what it was. I'm top of my head. It's at least several 100,000 messages per day that you could get through AT&T. Don't quote me on that. We have all of this on our website, by the way. All of those 10 DLC facts and figures.
Gotcha.
How am I doing? Are we doing good?
We're doing
Everybody,
great.
am I going too fast? So,
No, you're fine. We're
all
20
right.
after. We're right on schedule.
Perfect. All right. Well, so I think that's it. I'm hoping that we've given you some kind of ideas of what's the best option for you. Now we move on to, really how do you format your messaging? What are the things you need to make sure that are just basics? Right? These are things that are required. These are things that are expected, and these are probably, in many cases, the most important parts of your text message. So when you're sending it, and again, this applies to everything, not just political, but it's really important to have it in your political messages. You got to always state who the message is from. So if you're writing out your content, you want to say, this is the PAC, or this is, I'm so-and-so, XYZ candidate for president, XYZ for Congress. Be really clear who the text message is from. And you also have to have the TCPA required opt-out, right? Industry standard is stop. Some other people have used other things like no, or cancel, or like that. We recommend stop, but that's not to say that you're only can use stop, right? So really important to make sure that is included with all of your messaging, and it's also needs to be included in your sample messages that you're submitting for approval. Mm-hmm. So when you're writing your text message, every one of those 3 options for short code, toll free, and 10 DLC, you have to show basically the carriers, this is the text message I'm going to send to these voters, right? And if they don't see the clearly, the brand identified, if they don't see the mandatory opt out, they also making sure that they're going to look for keywords in your message that go against the CTIA, forbidden words, shaft. They're also going to make sure that you have all the other critical components in there. They're going to check your links. They're going to maybe even call the phone numbers you list, right? So you want to make sure that your message is really optimized for approval and optimized for deliverability or delivery to the consumer. So one of the things that we always recommend, and this may not always be an option, for everybody, but simple things you can do if you're writing out this content, use spell check, use grammar check. If you have access to a copywriter or a professional, script writer, have them review that, have them write this for you. We see so many campaigns get declined right out of before they even get going, because the message content is just, it's not legible. It looks suspicious. The URLs aren't optimized. We're still using that bit.ly shorteners, or using alphanumeric combinations. And so really, those are the things that you really want to have in order before you submit the campaign for approval. We've also promoted this on other, type of ebooks in our webinars. Submit your final version. Don't submit your draft. Yeah, I'm going to be sending this message. It's going to sound something like this. Don't do that. Make sure that what you are ready to start sending out to the lists, to the subscribers, is exactly what you're providing in your sample messages on your applications. Did I miss anything, Tim?
No, you got it. And I think these last couple of bullet points are important. You need to go out there and make sure you understand the rules, the TCPA, the CTIA, and I love that we added this. make sure that you're up to snuff with platform and carrier rules. T-Mobile at a minimum, because
Mhm.
if you go to our website, go under resources, look under the surcharge page for SMS, probably three-quarters of that page is devoted to T-Mobile and their, I'm going to use the word onerous,
Yeah, right.
list of potential penalties if you go run afoul of their rules. So T-Mobile has the most strenuous rules about what they will and won't allow on their network. If you follow them, you're pretty much going to be in line with the other ones as well.
That's accurate. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, when it comes to text messaging, that's something that you really have to make sure that you keep in mind is that it's the carrier's network. It's their rules. It's AT&T and T-Mobile and Verizon and US Cellular's.
Yep.
It's their rules. And so you really have to be aware of those, even though you think that, hey, well, my message meets TCPA compliance. I follow the CTI best practices. Why am I having issues? Why am I getting blocked? Why is this not getting approved? Because maybe there's something in there that specifically goes against T-Mobile or Verizon or AT&T's acceptable use policy, right? And so there are certain things that are allowed under TCPA, but the carrier said, well, we really don't really want that traffic. We're starting to see that with the lead gen. We're starting to see that with third-party lead sharing.
Yep.
Insurance, financial marketing was the most recent one, right? So there's certain things that the carriers really don't want to see on their networks, and so you got to make sure that you're aware of that before you start trying to submit these for approval.
That's right.
All right, so you've done all of that. Political messaging by default or by its nature, right, is going to be a little more volatile, and it's definitely more sensitive. So, the number one thing that you're probably going to see is, higher opt-out rates, right, and political messaging being flagged as unsolicited spam. So that's why it's really critical. And Tim brought up a great point, right? Make sure your opt-outs work before you start sending the traffic. Make sure your opt-outs work before you even submit it for approval by the DCAs and the carriers. And so, and then make sure your system is set up to send that confirmation text message that they have been opted out. One of the things that's so critical here is opt-out has such an impact that the mobile subscribers have so much power to really cause problems for everybody who's in this business, right? So the best thing is that if they don't like your message, they're just going to hit stop, right? If they hit stop, you tell them they've been opted out and they never see another text message, it's probably the end of it. But if the opt-out isn't working and you're not taking them out of your contact list and you keep sending them text messages, at that point now they're a little more aggravated and they're more likely to escalate a complaint with the mobile carriers, right? And if it goes beyond that, right, then they could be contacting TCP attorneys, and now you're really in a mess, right? So
Yeah.
really making sure the opt-outs are solid, making sure that everything's tested before you start sending. And then direct opt-in. Now we're going to cover a little bit some of the, there's some gray area around opt-in with political text messaging. Best practice is always to have direct opt-in where possible. So, making sure that, and even under the new FCC order, they really want to see a one-to-one direct opt-in, right? So the subscriber opted in directly to the brand that they're receiving the text messages from.
Right.
If you're a reseller of messaging services or communication services, make sure you keep track of that opt-in, right? Having detailed records. There's a couple out there that do it's like a hosted third party. Trusted Form, I think, is one of them.
Right.
If you're not using someone like that, right, it's really, and I think this is going to be more critical as we move into the next several years with compliance, is keeping really detailed records of who opted in and when, and making sure that it's, if audited, right, you can actually provide that data. Now, I'm saying it's really more important now, but it's always been something that's been required. It's always been important to keep that, right? So just if you haven't been doing that, now's the time to really focus in and making sure you have everything tidied up for keeping opt-in records.
Yeah. Two things, Scott, before we
Yep.
continue. One is somebody's asking, where can we find the most up-to-date carrier rules? Don't worry, we'll actually include links to those in the follow-up email to the webinar. We've also got them on our website and lots of different places, but we're happy to provide those to you. The other thing is earlier you mentioned a really important word, which is, sort of the percentage of stops that one of our, potential customers will receive. So we call that a stop rate. So can you remind people, like, what is an acceptable stop rate on a campaign?
Right. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So what's acceptable? If you go in and actually read T-Mobile's AUP or their acceptable use policy, they actually state that opt-outs that exceed 0.5% 1%, one half of 1%
Yeah.
is considered unacceptable, right?
Yeah.
So I can't imagine. I mean, that in a perfect world, yes, opt out of zero would be, that's where everybody wants to strive for. We all want to strive for that.
Right.
What I've actually seen and what I've heard is that typically 2% is that kind of, that's the cliff, right? And we've actually seen that because typically anything over 2% gets monitored, and then all of a sudden, your traffic gets they really crank up the spam filters on any traffic that has an opt out exceeds typically 2%. So
Right.
if you have that flexibility within your platform to set some goals and some parameters, set some alerts. If you see traffic that's past 1.5%, your goal really should be less than 1%, right?
Right.
At 1.5%, you should be probably triggering some alerts. Hey, get some eyeballs on your traffic, on some of the responses you're getting. Maybe something's off, and look at why that opt out is so much higher on your traffic, right? At 2% should be pretty much at that point, you should be pausing your campaigns and really digging in to see why that opt out escalated above 2%.
Yeah.
Best case is that you're going to get it filtered. Worst case is that you might trigger an RCA from one of the carriers. So
Yeah.
then you have to really explain why your opt out so high.
Yeah.
So
Scott,
really good point.
I feel like I'm a standard user of text messaging. If I opt into something and I get a message and I suddenly decide I don't want it anymore, if I say stop and I get a thing back saying, you're good, we've unsubscribed you, and you don't text me again, I'm not going to report you.
Yep.
It's not going to happen. But if you hit me even one more time, I'm
Yep.
going to do that. And you and I have been in meetings where we've literally been shown a list of 4 or 5 customers of ours that had one of those requests for information come back about a stop that wasn't properly handled, and we had to explain that to the carrier. So
Mhm.
you can prevent heartburn on our side, but also run a better campaign just by following the rules, just by making sure
Yep.
these things work. And
Yep.
it is interesting to have it in the back of your mind. It's only 0.5% that can get you potentially in trouble.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
where they say that
yeah,
they want it to be.
right.
So yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you can really work hard to keep it under 1%, that's fantastic. Political messaging, as mentioned earlier, by default, though, it's a little more volatile, a little more
Yeah,
sensitive. So you're probably going to have a little bit higher than normal opt outs on that. So you just have to be aware of it. We're
yeah,
aware of it. Our DCAs are aware of it, and the carriers are aware of it.
that's right.
So yeah, really good point.
Yeah,
All right, we're moving on to robo rules and regulations for politicians, right?
yeah,
So, and that's something that's really interesting because a lot of the existing rules for political, um, marketing, if you want to call it that, really revolved around voice, right?
hmm
Robocalls or outbound calling, and so typically there's a lot of things that have, political calling by default has been exempt from the do not call list. And there's an issue that if you're using an ATDS, an automated dialing telephone system, I think that's the acronym. If you're using an automated system to broadcast the calls or the dialer, then you actually have to have consent, right? And so that's the important part. We have this on our website. There's a lot of good content about there's express written consent, there's implied consent. What's the difference? So if you're using an automated dialing system to make your outbound calls, right, you have to have consent. Now, however, one of the loopholes that we've seen with that is that if the system is being hand dialed,
yeah,
uh, and if that's for calls and even text messaging, right, you don't typically need consent to do that. So we've seen a lot of people who specialize on political messaging who actually have a platform that allows those messages and those calls to be initiated from a SIM card, from a handset or another, like a mobile phone. So that is kind of that, if you want to call it a loophole, that's how a lot of people get out of being able to send text messages without, the consent component. Now, Tim, you mentioned, right? You're receiving text messages. You're like, I didn't opt in for that. Well,
right.
why am I getting this? I didn't opt in for this, right? So that's probably why you're getting that text message.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Um, oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say too, and as you and I both know too, the FCC said in December, all right, guys, we're now going to call the do not call list also the do not text list. So that's something new.
Yep.
And we said it here that, you want to be ingesting that list and leveraging it before you start making outbound calls or texts.
It's a best practice.
Yeah.
So political calling is exempt from the do not call list. And also be aware There's a national DNC database. There's probably two or three now, and then there's also individual state DNC databases that you have to, be aware of, and actually have to make sure that if you're calling, you can't be sending, calls to people or either one of those databases. And there's some really good third-party services out there who actually can you can get this data. You can go into their portal. You can scrub your lists against the DNC databases. TCPA litigators, and of course, removing landlines, or what they call PSTN numbers, out of your contact list, right? So, however, political, you're exempt for calling, and then when they eventually kind of make that rule that text messaging, you can't text to someone who's on the do not call list. Pretty confident that political text messaging is also going to be exempt from the do not call list,
Yeah.
based
Hey,
on
Scott,
what I've seen.
Scott, a good follow-up to this notion of using stop is the sort of the standard. Somebody's
Mhm.
asking, well, what about using other opt-outs? Like, what if someone literally replies with lose my number instead of stop?
Okay,
Like, how does that
so
work?
those are great questions, and I think a lot of people in this industry have come up with a solution that's using AI. So the AI basically looks
Mm,
at the inbound responder, right, and it's looking for keywords or phrases. So
right.
yes, you can build an opt like they call a responder list of those specific keywords, but a subscriber who responds, and they could be using some profanity, right? Hey, never blah 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 me again.
Right.
Then that's their message, right? Well, that AI can look at that and say, ah, sounds like you want to opt out. We'll go ahead and remove you from our subscription list, and you'll never hear from us again, right?
Right. Right.
So I think really that's the solution, is having some kind of AI that can actually interpret what that outbound or that stop or the opt out response is from the subscriber, just to be safe. So
No. Gotcha.
okay, is there anything we missed on that last slide?
No, we got them all.
Okay.
Yep, we're good.
This is a new thing that kind of, again, really more applies to political robocalling. Very important if you're a business, you're a platform that basically uses messaging, voice, and maybe other things, social media, etc. This is something to make sure that you're aware of. And we have all of this information and links to where this is located on the FCC's website. These are just kind of making it really clear, right? They don't want to have people blasted. Automated opt out. There's I don't remember what the solution was for automated opt outs, where I don't know if the subscriber could just press a button and it automatically takes them out, or they just say stop over the phone and it recognizes it and opts them out. But there's additional rules here that you need to be aware of. Very, very important.
Yep.
And as far as I know, none of this applies to political text messaging. So we know that the text messaging is going to have a little more restrictions industry wide over the next 12 months or so. But right now, I don't think this is applying to text messaging, just voice.
Yeah, and the three call max in 30 days is we would call that responsible dialing, and there's lots of content out there about what that means. So if you're doing any kind of automated calling, you got to make sure you're responsibly dialing, which
Yeah.
those it keeps tightening as time goes on for the
Yep.
right reasons. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Here we go.
So
Here's the new stuff.
yeah, so I know a lot of people are wondering about this, and there's a lot of good information out there about what this means. What I've learned, and we are kind of entrenched into a lot of this industry, the messaging, the high volume performance marketing industry, really kind of try to keep our hands on the pulse of what's going on, or fingers on the pulse of what's going on. I would definitely recommend, if you're doing any type of high volume marketing, voice or messaging, and you're really not sure what this means, does this really apply to you? You're always, there's fantastic resources out there. Go talk to a telecom attorney, pay for one session, right? We're talking about here is really just kind of how we're interpreting this. We're not telecom attorneys, so it's always best practice to make sure you get a professional opinion of what this means for your business. But here's what I can tell you based on what I've read, is that this new order is really targeted at lead gen and affiliate marketing,
Yep.
and some of the loopholes with this. I haven't sensed anything in this that really is targeting political text messaging. So that's really what we're here for today. And so for a lot of the things, and a lot of the things that this new order kind of talks about, Commio has really been promoting over the last several years as best practice, right? One-to-one, having consent, having verifiable consent, right? Having the records of that subscriber's consent. Making sure that you follow the TCPA, CTI best practices, right? Tone, content, all of that stuff. So a lot of the things that they're doing with this new order really are targeting more of that third party lead sharing. Like if I go to a website and I opt in to receive a text message from a particular brand, right, that I'm not going to get 2 days later hundreds of text messages from all the people that they're partnered with, right?
Yep.
Now, one thing I can tell you, there's been a lot of backlash on this particular this order, and primarily from the Small Business Administration, chambers of Congress, chambers of commerce. And so this is really not just affecting the lead gen businesses, the performance marketing businesses, but this is actually going to impact a lot of small and medium sized businesses and probably some large enterprise businesses as well. So I think there is a lot of stuff going on in the industry. There's a lot of pushback on the FCC for this. I also read that this is actually looking at going into effect within 12 months of the actual release of the order. So I think this went out in December,
Yep.
December 13th. And so I would suspect that you're not going to really see any enforcement on this, official enforcements on this by the 13th. And a lot of that has to do with some of the other components that require the like the carriers, the service providers, to have additional mechanisms like we already have in place for stir shake. And that takes time, that takes technology. The DNC database has to be built, right, for if it's going to be separate than the voice. So there's a lot of other things that have to happen. And I think that's why this is, there's a little bit of time to kind of get things in order for this particular one.
Yeah, I was gonna say we got two questions about that. Yeah, these are not in effect today, but these were basically this is what the FCC does. They kind of lay down what they think their next set of rules are going to be, and then they ask for input. So they're not in effect, but that input kind of right, Scott. We see it. It usually does kind of shave the rough edges off of these things. So
Yep.
there's a long time frame here. So these things will probably not kick in until the earliest next December.
Yep.
But expect there's some to be some pretty significant changes because, to be honest, this puts thousands of businesses out of business, right? Anybody
Mhm.
involved in lead gen, anybody involved in financial marketing, like it would basically bankrupt them. So that doesn't mean that we don't want to see better adherence to this one-to-one opt-in, that when you're opting in to one brand, they shouldn't be able to make that trickle down to other brands.
Yep.
But what does that mean? Like sometimes like a bank will own two or three other sort of associated businesses, like how far should it go? So they still need to figure all the nuances out. So don't worry about that yet, but there
Yeah.
are still rules you have to follow, CTIA all
Yeah.
the way.
And, the thing that I also, as a follow up to that, I thought was kind of favorable is that the FCC also kind of stated like, hey, we get it. We understand that this is, really
Yep.
going to affect legitimate businesses. So we're going to work right to make sure that, this is amicable. It's really only affecting those who are maliciously using,
Yeah.
third party lead gen, right?
Right.
So don't think it's the end of the world if that's your business, right? There's a lot of other options. You just have to make some adjustments, and that's really the big thing. And we work with a lot of companies who are in the lead gen space, and we've been working for the last probably 8 months of, we saw this coming a long time ago, not this particular order, but just based on the amount of traffic and the amount of responses and issues that we're seeing with the mobile carriers. The mobile carriers really started pushing back on this stuff a long time ago,
Right.
right? So this is really kind of just solidifying what was already in place, and it adds a handful of other components that really more aligned to really blocking this messages from actually hitting the network in the first place, or identifying really bad actors, blacklisting them, and then making sure none of those messages get across to any of the mobile carriers. So, but again, those things are in place for Stir Shaken today, and I think that's really what this is trying to align to.
You got it. Yeah, and I think last but not least, Scott, you and your team in particular, our account managers, have really been working closely with our customers who have added political messaging in particular as a new product to the repertoire,
Mm-hmm.
and we're here to guide you all the way. We're the ones who have to keep up with all these new rules, make sure that when you're applying for your campaigns, your brand registrations, like we have all these tools set up to make you successful and do it as fast as we can. So that's really what you need in 2024. There's a lot of people who say they do this just like we do, but we've got the expertise, we've got the team, and my hair was not this gray when I started 5 years ago at Commio, and I think it's
I actually
because of
had a
all
full
these
head of hair
rules.
5 years
Uh-huh.
ago, Tim.
Yeah.
So you kind of see, yeah. And
Yeah.
I really want to kind of just chime in on that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we are, and it's not just the sales team. Our sales
Yeah.
teams, our account management teams, our CS teams are not. We are on the front lines of this every day.
Yep.
Every different type of business use case, every use case that you see, like that you're, that are offered in the campaign registration, the TCR. Every customer we have is checking one of those boxes. So I can't imagine that anybody out there is really working as hard and is fighting in the front lines as much as we are. And we work directly with the DCAs, in many cases directly with the carriers, right? So I think that's the value add that we bring. And if you have any questions on any of this stuff, myself, if you have an account manager, CS or not, right, we're always happy to do what we can to jump on a call with you, or do things via a ticket or email to make sure that you have all your questions answered, and understand
Yeah.
how to make it work with all of these changes.
Yeah. So Scott, I know we're running a tiny bit long, but that's okay. We did have a few questions, so I'll just
Sure.
put them in front of you. So back to the question about what are the legalities around RVM, and what about consent with respect to political campaigns for text calling and RVM?
Okay. I always want to use the best practices. You really need consent.
Yeah.
RVM, in fact, it's something that not a lot of people are using, but we do
Yeah.
have a lot of people using it for other type of use cases. And I think, for those particular customers or anybody who wants to consider RVM for political, there's definitely a couple things that you want to consider. In fact, I wrote myself some notes on these. Let's see. All right, RVM, ringless voicemail.
Yep.
Um, Best practice. Make sure any number that you're going to call or text, make sure you scrubbed it, right? So RVM being a voice component, right, does fall under the robocall, requirements, and you want to make sure that you scrub your contact lists against the DNCs. Remember, there's more than one DNC database, federal and state. You want to make sure that you also remove anything that is a known TCPA litigator, if you want to, avoid a bunch of grief, and then, of course, removing PSTN numbers.
Yeah.
So I've actually seen this quite a bit recently. Is certain customers have been sending large volumes of text to numbers that are just bad. They're not good
Mm.
numbers, and so the code that we get back is it's not a reachable mobile number, or there's some kind of an error with that. Well, the carriers look at that. If you're getting a bunch of failures because your calling list is bad, that may trigger an audit. That may trigger an RCA, right? So really make sure you have clean lists. Make sure that when if you're out there making these RVM calls, make sure the numbers that you're using as source DIDs, whether it's a local number or a toll-free number, make sure that those numbers actually can receive text messages and that they can actually receive callbacks. We've seen that before. I'm leaving a bunch of voicemails. The subscriber's like, yeah, I'm interested. Well, I'm either interested or no, I want to find out how to get off of your list. So they try to call the number back and the number doesn't route, right? It
Mm.
hasn't been configured in the trunking. So,
Mm.
make sure those things are working before you start dialing. And then this kind of goes along with also what you have to do with the text messaging. Clearly identify, who you are. When you leave
Yeah.
that voicemail, hi, this is Scott from Commio. Just wanted to follow up on your inquiry regarding the political messaging campaign. You can call me back at this number, or you can reach me at this email address. If you would like to opt out from receiving further voicemails, you can, text stop to our 800 number, or you can go to unsubscribe at commio.com and so forth, right? Those are the components. Literally what I just gave you as an example of what your ringless voicemail needs to say. So you identify who you are. You need to confirm that they have actually opted in to receive that. You just can't, you can't just like, well, hi so and so, I'm so and so, and here's my link, and give me money. Like, that's not what the carriers are looking for. And if you get a complaint on that, they're going to flag that, and you have to make sure that the opt-in, the confirmation of opt-in is there, and then you make sure that you have a clear and compliant message, right? No profanity. Make sure it's useful. Voice tone is critical, right?
Yep.
That's all. Do the marketing 101. Look through all of that to make sure, just like messaging, right? What words have meanings, and what you say and how you say them are going to be more impactful than when you're doing RVM and text messaging. So,
Yeah. And
answer that
Scott,
question?
yeah, we were asked to like, what's the best source to get a TCPA litigator list?
Blacklist Alliance. I don't
Okay.
have those, so they have a fan. There's and I'm not saying you have to go use Blacklist. There's quite a few
Mm.
out there that do that. But that is your best option for someone who specializes in leads, DNC, TCPA litigator, and then of course, they have some ability to do carrier lookups to see if the number is an actual mobile number or if it's an actual landline type of number.
Yeah. So Scott, what I keep hearing, and I don't mean to be a broken record because I feel like I am, is if you dot your I's, cross your T's, do your due diligence, scrub your lists, make sure that all your messages are final before you register. You got to run this as a professional project, right? As a
Yep.
professional, product out, whatever you're adding to your business,
Hmm.
you're probably going to be okay.
Yep.
It's the people that rush it. Sometimes you give a technical person something where, a writer or an editor would do a better job of making sure that the stuff is, anyway, you get the idea.
Hmm.
Yeah, everybody just needs to take a breath and slow down and make sure that they know the rules, follow the rules. And we have hundreds of businesses that are doing great things with texting and are staying not afoul of the rules. And anyway, I just had to say
I,
that.
I would like, can I add
Yeah,
one
please.
something to that? And so one
Sure.
of the things that we really didn't cover too much, and we've covered this in previous webinars, and we have ebooks on this. But when you're registering campaigns, and you're going to be sending a text message, and you want that subscriber slash voter to go to your candidate's website
Yeah.
or to the PAC's website, the website has to look professional. It has to, perception is everything.
Yep.
So it's really critical that you have very clear and concise opt-in language. We have that. If you're not sure what is clear and concise and what's compliant, we can provide you samples of what that should look like. The
Hmm.
other thing too is that put some effort into it. Make it look nice. Make it look like if someone sent you a text message and you went to it, right, you want like, oh my god, that's like nice cheap logo, or there's no logo at all and it was made on Windows 95. You're getting all these errors and links, and there's broken links or links that don't exist. Like, you're going to get that perception this is a scam or
Yeah.
it's not compliant, right? So put
Right.
some effort into your web property. And then the other critical component is having your privacy policies,
Right.
your terms and conditions. If possible, adding mobile terms and conditions.
Yeah.
We have samples of mobile terms and conditions that you can look at to say this is really, if the DCAs and the carriers see this, that's really what they're looking for. If they see it, they feel more better. They feel like you're more of a safer type of campaign for them to allow in their networks, right? So we have a
Yeah.
whole bunch of information on best practices around web properties and things that you should do. Don't you have a you have a checklist too, don't you, Tim?
Yes. Absolutely. Yep.
Yep.
We'll,
Punch
we'll,
list.
yeah, we'll add that to the email as well in reply.
Yep.
And by the way,
Awesome.
somebody offered up, they said, hey, tcpaworld.com is a great resource. Are you familiar with that site, Scott?
I've
Yeah.
heard of it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's a good
that's
one.
fantastic. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we'll add that to our collateral that we have on our site. And so again,
Yeah.
carrier AUPs, make sure you understand with what the carriers want on their networks, what they feel is acceptable. CTIA, TCPA, right? It's your responsibility to understand all of that. We've
Right.
got a lot of the lifting for you. We can help you understand that, but it's also important, right, that you know the rules.
Yeah. And by the way, Scott, you said something earlier on. I'm going to repeat it and then add to it, which is you really need to make sure that you're consulting your own telecom attorney about all these legalities, right? Because we're not legal people. I don't do that for a living. We do our best to follow the
Sure.
rules.
Yep.
Oh gosh, I knew I was going to forget the second thing.
Compliance manager.
Thank you. You rescued me.
I
Yeah.
had I had I had a sense you were going there.
Yeah. So yeah, the next thing is this might be the year that you're going to have to hire a full-time or a part-time compliance person on your team because they're the ones who are going to have to marinate in all this information to help keep you up
Yep.
to date. Yeah.
Absolutely
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for rescuing
Get
me.
a consultant, an attorney, or find someone on your staff who can dedicate the time and resources to
Right.
become a subject matter expert on compliance. It sounds so fun.
It's hard to believe we've come from jamming P2P traffic down A to P rails 5 years ago to
Hmm.
you got to hire a compliance person and there's
Right.
85,000 rules and you got to register. I mean, we've seen the whole
Yep.
thing go from soup to nuts. Oh, by the way,
Yep.
last question, because I know we're
Yep.
really going over now, is somebody asked, do we offer XMPP interconnectivity?
I'm not aware. We used to. I don't think we
Oh,
offer that anymore, but
okay.
we can confirm. So Tim, if you can get their contact information,
Yeah.
I'm gonna probably lead with we unfortunately no, but let's confirm.
Okay. Well, great, Scott. We've done this webinar now once before. We're going to do it every 2 years, probably going forward. And
Right.
then, and in the interim, we'll just leave you with, Commio's here to be your partner. We're not here to sell you something, but we're here to consult with you. So maybe there's a fit, maybe we can help, maybe not. But, as 2024 starts and this campaign is now, 10, 11 months down the road. If you're thinking about doing political messaging or you're already doing it, we can definitely help you send those messages. We can extend your capacity as well as help you get started. So Scott and his team and our sales team is here to, consult with you and look at your use cases, make sure, let you know what this current state of the state is, give you advice and help you in any way that we can. So
Mhm.
that's what we're here to do. Like we say, there's a better way, and Commio could potentially be a good fit for you as a potential vendor. So you
Yeah.
see our email down here, support@commio.com or even sales@commio.com, and we can answer your questions. We did record this webinar. We will be sending out that recording. Feel free to share it. And if you have any questions, just reply to that email. All those questions come to me, including any questions we didn't answer during this time together. And I'll get them to Scott and we will reply to you one-on-one. So, we're here to help. So, Scott, thanks
Awesome.
again for your time. I know you're super busy. And everybody else, happy presidential election year.
That sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your
Enjoy.
time. Yep.
All right.